some things apply to everyone. This video pretty much applies to Moorish Americans for the most part. This applies to Moorish Americans and so-called black people, so-called colored people. This is for you. So the first thing I want to say is, if you don't know who Noble Drew Ali is, you should find out who he is, right? If you're a Christian and you are not afraid to step out and find out a little bit more, Google the Moorish Science Temple of America and visit the closest one and just ask some questions. Say, hey, listen, you heard about Noble Drew Ali, nationality. Somebody said we were Moorish Americans and not black people, and you just wanted to know more information about it. Now, what I don't want you to think is that because I'm putting this document here, it talks about notice, I'm a Moorish American and all these things, that this is sufficient. No, it's not sufficient, right? I can't say I've learned. I don't want to profess that I know everything because I don't. But I'm learning Moorish science. I'm learning the truth about my birthrights and my nationality. And the Honorable Prophet Noble Drew Ali came in the 1900s, like 1916, I think it was 1916, or in the 1920s. But he established the school to teach so-called African Americans and Negroes the truth about their birthrights, so that he can uplift them, they can become better citizens, better people, humanitarians, and just learn the truth of who they were, post slavery, post being lied to about your history and everything, so that you could be cut off from your birthrights, from rights in general, right? So that's who Noble Drew Ali was. He was a scientist, he was a visionary, he was an adept, and I can tell you, as a researcher who's kind of been combing through present day law and present day system with the way things was there and what he put into place, Noble Drew Ali knew something without a doubt. He had a high level of expertise, and he made very strategic moves. So I say that to say that to get the fullness of what it means to be a Moorish American, to understand the truth about your birthrights, to get the full experience, if you are capable, join the Moorish Science Temple of America in some capacity, and at least make a heartfelt effort to understand, what it was that Prophet Noble Drew Ali was trying to bring to you, to try to understand the salvation piece. And when I say salvation, I mean the ultimate correction of your civil and political status in America, right? Because he knew something about jurisprudence. And that's the key right here. This is the difference in just being a Moor or being a Moorish American under the vine and the fig tree, so that you can be acknowledged as such on the you can have your political rights, international rights, and be recognized as a nation. It was proclaiming your nationality, and then the throughput that Noble Drew Ali set up to teach us, the body politic, which is the Moorish Science Temple of America. So that's all I'll say about that. I just don't want it to be misrepresented that I'm selling you nationality or any of that. This is actually a document that I personally created for myself. It wasn't really for the master file or anything else. It was for myself. Let's say for the estate, right? For my affairs. And that's all it was. Nobody told me to do this. I didn't ask for no permission to do this. I just did. But I'm sharing it with everybody, and I would really enjoy your feedback, especially Moors that know more about Moorish science than I do, that know more about the Prophet's demonstration than I do. Because all I try to do is build on top of the foundation, right? Use what it is that was left for us. Okay, I'm not going to talk no more. I'm going to go ahead and get into this. So let me take a little breather. All right, so let's see. Make that any bigger. This as big as it's gonna get. So I start with the flag right here because this is the Moorish American flag, also the Moroccan flag. Now, in actuality, as a tidbit, this is not really the Moorish American flag. This is the Moroccan flag. So, ideally, if you want to be specific and precise, you want to get the Moorish American flag. The difference is, I don't know if you can see it on here. If I can zoom in closely. The difference is, you see how this flag has the overlap with the, these are, I guess you would say, black lines that outline it. And the Moorish flag doesn't really have these overlaps. It's just a green star, right? This guy's black, actually. And you would see it if you was looking at this when you see where these actual stars cross over each other. It's just not a green star on top of the red flag. So that's just something to look at. And when you look at some of these, some of these flags don't have that. And it's actually, okay, so yeah, we'll rock with that for now. So, okay, now we start with the flag because it's our understanding that when you're dealing on these higher levels of law, correcting the status of the person, you're dealing in maritime, admiralty, you're dealing with treaties, international law. So, under maritime admiralty law, ships have a flag on the vessel, and that flag will be seen, and that'll let the other ship or the other party that you're dealing with know whether to give a signal or a pass or however, based off of whatever the commercial or the international maritime relationships between these sovereign bodies or these countries or nations or what have you. So in this particular case, this flag represents the Moorish Empire and Morocco, the Kingdom of Morocco, and it's, I guess you could, well, I'm not going to call it a corporate status, but nonetheless, these two nations have a treaty, and the treaty establishes that the subjects of both nations, or the nationals of both nations, are on amicable relationships in each other's nation or territory. So the significance of this would be equal protection in law, something that the African American or black person in their default status does not have, and something that they cannot be given under the 14th Amendment. That's a little bit beyond the scope of where we're at right now. So, but anyways, we're dealing with the treaties when we have the flag here. We're dealing with identifying the vessel, right? But fortunately, we are not belligerents or combative. We have a flag with the acknowledged and recognized treaty in the United States Depository, and where they deposit international treaties. So this is why I think we should you just have to know what you're doing before you start creating different things. And I don't know where are you coming from with it. Some people change the national flag. I don't know. It is what it is, but neither here nor there. So here's that, and now I put at the top of the document the name of the person. I could have left the state off. I could have just left it in all caps, but I wanted to be very specific. So I put John Alex Doe Estate, Executor Office, and then I have the address here. And then from. Now, why did I write this in all caps, if anybody's wondering? So for this letter, because it's executor letter notice, highest level notice, highest office, international maritime, private, international waters, and all of that stuff, I used the military correspondence manual. And you can Google that. And I know about this because I did military correspondence in the military. That's one of the things I did, aside from also being IT, or information technology, network engineer. I was fortunate. I got a lot of real good skills through my tenure of almost 8 years in the United States Marine Corps. But I learned all about this. They have something called the NAVMAC 5216. You can Google it, it's public information, and it'll teach you how to draft in the proper format for military or executive level communications and correspondence. And it's very simple, very easy to follow. I would suggest you look at it. And then also, the United Nations has a communications or correspondence manual. And I don't think you have to do this with everything. I just think it puts a good touch on your executive notices. Me, I'm the type of person that I apply everything that I can. As I learn something, I try to apply it. And consequently, it makes me very patient. I'm never in a rush to have to get something out because I don't know how long it's going to take to draft it. And that's just the reality. It's just, I don't try to run to catch up with time, because that's one of the tools I think that's used to trap and control and enslavement. So there we have it. It comes from, I encourage you to look at that manual because it gives you a lot of really good insight. It gives you a lot of insight into communications and correspondence. It answers a lot of just general questions for you. Even signing, the authority and the capacity in which you sign documents, all of that, they address that, and they give you examples in that guide. So anyway, let's just get into this and see what it's about. So it comes from the Office of the General Executor of the John Alex Doe Estate. Now, by the way, for anyone who's interested, I have the personal status correction master file outline. It goes through your will and testament, where we appoint the executor for the estate. So at this point, that's already done. And, we go through the last will and testament, the UCC filing, and the different things. And it's in a kind of a easy to follow outline process. But anyway, I just mentioned that because this is just another executor notice that deals with important information and policy, private policy, in regards to the person or the estate or the affairs in general. So it's a notice from the general executor. And it goes to who? A distribution list. Who's on this distribution list? Now, the thing about the distribution list, something I recently was reminded when I went through the NAVMAC 5216. It's just a little tidbit that I picked up and learned from it. It's best not to send communications to individuals when you're doing notices and things like this. It's different if somebody's harmed you and you have to do administrative procedure. It's best to send and direct your communications towards offices. So I'll remove these names, and we see on the distribution list, it's going to the Secretary of State, it's going to the Attorney General, is going to the Office of the Internal Tax Council, Department of the Treasury, is going to the Department of the Treasury, and is going to the United States Senate via Senator Rob Potman. Now, in this particular case, he's the senator for Ohio, which is where the estate or where the vessel originally was registered with certain particulars in the commerce, because it's based on the birth certificate. And I know that congressmen, senators, and House of Representatives, they have kind of a oversight, a protective and authoritative role when it comes to oversight of federal agencies. So this is why I'm including them, because they also have an obligation to perform under the law of the land, which is the United States Constitution, which, if there's any legitimate government, is under the Constitution and their oath to it. And I said if there's any legitimacy in the government. So I give them all notice. And here, as you see, this is where I put the registered mail or certified mail numbers. Now, for these matters, me personally, I'm not saying that you have to. I take these things very serious. I'm probably going to be giving these offices notice via registered mail. You could do certified mail, but this helps you keep track. This also helps you keep track, and you will include just a whole copy of this distribution list in the communications, so each recipient can know every other office that received this notice and request to correct records. Now, I was strategic. so that I wrote this as a notice and a request to correct records. Because the notice is just stuff that I want you to know. Private international law. And the request to correct records are things that are incumbent upon you based off of the constitutional oath and the laws that were passed by Congress that require you to correct and update records. You know, the Privacy Act, Freedom of Information Act, and Administrative Procedure Acts, other acts that deal with records retention and the integrity of records. So I tapped into that and I was strategic. So it's a notice and it's a request to correct records. Now I have some enclosures here. You'll see where the enclosures come in later. These are supportive to, these are laws and public records that support what is being laid out. So one enclosure is a commemorative. And you'll see it later. It shows the diplomatic relations between the Kingdom of Morocco, and this is from the Bureau of Engraving and Printing. And in here it talks about Morocco being the jewel of Africa, extending back 1,000 years. So I know people hear the Kingdom of Morocco and then they think, well, no, we were the Moorish Empire. And this is why I say we have to get a better understanding of jurisprudence of what's going on. I can't profess to know everything, I don't. But it seems to me that all of the entitlements still remain, although some may be held under conservatorship, so meaning that we have to know how to navigate. So I don't want to kind of get too deep. Maybe I'm just kind of talking in my head and y'all don't even understand me. Hope that's not the case. So let me just continue on. So these are the enclosures in this notice. There's a commemorative, there's a DS-4240. That's a Department of State form. We'll look at that. And then there's a memorandum of understanding. So each of these letters I will address to the particular officer in that office. And I'll say, dear honorable whoever, the purpose. Now again, I got this format from the memoranda format, looking in the military correspondence manual. The purpose. You are receiving this memorandum to compel you to correct and amend records in your possession by authority of the United States privacy laws. And in parentheses, I put the Privacy Act of 1974. Authorizing the examination, correction, and amending of information that is suspected or known to be inaccurate, irrelevant, untimely, or incomplete. The laws, treaties, and factual data submitted in the enclosures are provided in support for correcting records of nationality for the following people or persons with associated identifying numbers. So now I can add my estate and the social security number, or the estate and the estate tax ID number if I have one. The executor, I can identify the executor as being different from the estate itself. I can identify the revocable living trust if I've already set that up. And I can put the tax ID number there if I want to. Why? Because this is also going to the Treasury Department, so they can update these records. What records do I want them to update? Well, here's the problem. I'm on number 2. Brands such as Negro, Black, and African American cause irreparable harm and damage. It is a crime for any group of people to violate human rights by clinging to names and the principles that delude to slavery. Now we're in the scope. This memorandum is restricted to records you maintain under the jurisdiction of the United States government, its fiduciaries and officers of trust, and its subordinate agencies. The agreement. I am relying on you to update and correct the records within 30 days unless more time is requested for sufficient cause. Additional request. I am further requesting a copy of records in your possession that may be corrected or affected by this notice. And then I put the Freedom of Information Act in parentheses. So I mentioned the Privacy Act that requires the updating and the correcting of records under their law, under their obligation. And I'm talking about those who've sworn an oath to protect and defend the Constitution. They have to get it done or cause it to be done. And then an additional request to give me a copy of the records that might be affected by this request. And I'll throw the Freedom of Information Act in there because I already mentioned the Privacy Act. So these give them in their in their world the authority to act. And I think sometimes this is something that Moors have to understand. And I'm not talking to all Moors. Some Moors know how to navigate above this, what I'm speaking on. But sometimes, even though we know what we are entitled to, the way that they wake up in their world, their restricted world, sometimes we have to give them citations of authority that allow them to act. It's the case when we're recording deeds and they don't want to record the deeds. It's the case when we're trying to get certain things done and they don't want to do it. Sometimes we have to give them the legal authority by showing them in their code where they're obligated to act. So you see how in some instances these codes don't apply to us, they apply to them, but even you have to give them the authority under their code sometimes. Neither here nor there. Now we just went through the notice signed by the General Executor, and now we already talked about the distribution list, and now let's get to the good stuff. Okay, here's the commemorative. This is something, you can get this off of eBay. I'm not going to read through it, but there's some real important keys that you can rely on in here that will give you more information about the relationship between the so-called African American Moorish Americans, which are descendants of Moroccans born in America, the diplomatic and the political relationships between the United States and Morocco. This says, the Kingdom of Morocco, known for centuries as the Jewel of Africa, has a historic relationship with the United States that dates back over 200 years. In 1787, after several years of negotiations between representatives of Sultan Sidi Muhammad bin Abdullah and American statesmen such as Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, Thomas, and Jefferson, they were all negotiating with this Muhammad bin Abdullah, who was the Sultan of Morocco. He was a brother. He wasn't a Arab. By what I seen, he was a dark-skinned brother. If he was here in America, he had a beard. Like everybody's rocking the thick beard now. That was the look that he rocked, and he had big lips. You know what I'm saying? He was clearly a brother. As a matter of fact, I'm gonna do a video, probably maybe throw him up in the next video or something like that. But anyway, this goes and this tells you that here's something interesting. Let me read this right here. A lot of the old school Moors would like this. Let's see. This was, I'm just jumping back in here. This was the first diplomatic agreement between the United States and an Arab Muslim, not Muslim, they said Muslim, an Arab Muslim or African state. The history of Morocco stretches back thousands of years. Known in the Arab world as the Maghrib, or place of the sunset. So if Morocco is in Northwest Africa, right? Visually pull it up if you don't know where Morocco is on the map. And also don't get confused. This is a recent occurrence of Morocco. There was a Moorish empire that at various times included many different territories, but present day Morocco, let's just say the Maghrib, when the Arab world, when they spoke of to the Maghrib, is called the place of the sunset, and they were in the furthest West Africa when they said that. So where would the place of the sunset be, right? Probably where they was, West Africa. But the point is, there's also the Maghrib al-Aqsa, which is the Maghrib of the extreme west, and in some places the furthest west, and in some places the place of the setting sun. So that would tell you when you're standing in the Maghrib al-Aqsa would be what we're pretty much today calling North America. That would be part of the Maghrib al-Aqsa, which was Moorish dominions under this sultan that the United States representatives Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and George Washington established the diplomatic relationships with, which is now what we call the Treaty of Peace and Friendship, or the Treaty of Marrakech is what it's called. So now this document and these stamps, notice this is something else, Moorish Americans, pay attention to this 22, because as you get into Moorish science, and you start studying what Prophet Noble Drew Ali did, you're going to notice that the number 2 and 22 often is things that relate to nationality and identity and the relation and the political status and things like that. It's an interesting thing that observation that I've made. This instrument, this document, or other similar ones like it, you can find this on eBay. Just Google Treaty of Peace and Friendship, Treaty with Morocco, United States Post Office, and you can find some very interesting things. So this is, the U.S. Post Office and the Bureau of Engraving and Printing. Now also, this is the U.S. Department of State form. What's the form number? DS 4240. I came across this on the Department of State website because if you're doing something such as that, what we're doing, you're requesting personal information under the Freedom of Information Act or the Privacy Act, you provide this form with information on the person, and it's a certification of identity so that they can provide you with what they need to provide you with. So this is a further way of being strategic to get to hopefully get a proper action. And I'm not saying just take what I'm doing. I'm saying whatever else you thought about to correct your nationality and identity, facts and things that you know. For example, Resolution 75. Those who know who that is, I didn't put that in here. But this you can provide to the Department of State, so when they pull in your records to update your records or give you whatever you're asking for, they can certify the identity. So between this form, the Privacy Act, and the Freedom of Information Act, I think you can reasonably expect a response, right? When you're asking them to update and correct the records that deal with nationality, domicile, residency, citizenship, and all of these things. And we're going to get into that. So I didn't really look over this form yet, but we'll look over it at the time. Now this is the memorandum. This is the memorandum that needs to be added to or corrected or updated in the records. Now, note, I hate to be all over the place, but I gotta scroll back up because when I was going through this, I realized that there's something that I did not do that I should have did. When we went through this cover letter, if you will, it says, "Dear Honorable Whoever," it lays out the purpose. You're receiving this memorandum to compel you to correct, amend records in your possession, right? We give him the names, the entities, the profiles, the accounts, or whatever, the estate that this notice applies to. We tell them the problem: Negro, black, and colored. That's the problem because it alludes to slavery. We tell them the scope of the records that it applies to. We tell them the agreement to correct and update in 30 days. And then we give them an additional request to give us all the records that it may apply to. What did we forget? We forgot, since this is a brief of everything, we forgot to briefly tell them precisely and exactly A, B, and C, correct this, that, and the other. Because if you give somebody, you got to think when somebody receives a letter or a package or a presentment for that matter, if they got to dig through all your paperwork to figure out what it is that you want done and all of this, it's probably going to get set aside somewhere. And especially if you can't write well, they might not really understand what you're trying to convey for them to do. So the only thing I forgot in this cover letter, which I am going to adjust when we finish this, is I'm going to make sure that it includes somewhere around the problem or somewhere down here. There's probably, I'm going to make sure that it includes specifically what needs to be corrected. Here they go. I'm sorry. Here's the correction surrender. Nationality, corrected to Moorish American. Race, corrected to Moorish. Religion, corrected to Islamism. Citizenship, corrected to American. All right. That's what needs to make it in your cover letter brief. Now you're basically saying, under the Privacy Act and the Freedom of Information Act, I want you to correct the records of nationality and all of that stuff, right? You give them those things to correct. You give them this form to certify the identity of the persons. And now, let's go down here. I'm going to read over this and try to close this out. The history of Morocco extends beyond 1,000 years. The Kingdom of Morocco was known for centuries as the Jewel of Africa. The people of Morocco are united in Islam. The United States has diplomatic relations extending back over 200 years, whereby the United States obliged itself to the Kingdom of Morocco, or actually, this would be the Moorish Empire. When the United States obliged itself to the Moorish Empire for its generosity and favorable treatment of the United States in trade and commerce within its dominions. This represents the longest standing treaty with the United States. Anyway, you see where I'm going with that. So we see that I need to get back in here and finish writing this. The United States at that time was recovering from waste and dissolution of a long war, vulnerable to its enemies and without the resources to protect its ships engaging in international commerce. Morocco extended the Treaty of Marrakesh, and I'm skipping over the fact that there was a lot of diplomatic relations leading up to the treaty. But Morocco did extend the Treaty of Peace and Friendship in 1787, granting, I believe it was 1786, but it was ratified, I believe, or whatever, it was finalized in 1787, granting protection to citizens of the United States, granting safe passage through ports and access to commerce in our dominions, as stated in George Washington letters to Sultan Sidi Muhammad. That's the Sultan that we were just talking about, wherein he writes, the encouragement which your majesty has been pleased, the encouragement which your majesty has been pleased generously to give to our commerce with your dominions, the punctuality with which you have caused the treaty with us to be observed, make a deep impression on the United States and confirm their respect for and attachment to your imperial majesty. I want to read that again because George Washington, this is just a little snippet of what he was saying in his letter. He's deeply in gratitude. He's almost like saying, I'm forever, indebted to you. I'm not going to say he's saying I'm forever indebted to you, but he's basically saying, we ain't going to forget this right here, what you done for us. This was big. That's basically what he's saying, right? He says, the encouragement which your majesty has been pleased generously to give to, let me read that again. I'm not getting it the right way. The encouragement which your majesty has been pleased generously to give to our commerce within your dominions, the punctuality with which you have caused the treaty with us to be observed, make a deep impression on the United States and confirm their respect for and attachment to your imperial majesty, the attachment to the empire, to the imperial majesty. These are the George Washington letters. And I have these in here as attachment A, and I have another letter, attachment B. These are official records because they come from the Washington Library, which I believe is, though you might as well say they're official records because they're official correspondence, communications in the setup of this country. So, the United States is doing business in North America, Al-Maghrib al-Aqsa, which is the modern name for Northwest Mexim, the land of the Moorish Empire. Moorish Americans are descendants of Moroccans born in America. The nationality of Moors was taken away from them in 1774, and the word Negro, black, and color was given to Moors by European nations. This occurred because they, Moors, honored not the principles of their mother and father and strayed after the gods of Europe, of whom they knew nothing. And this is from the Holy Quran of the Moorish Science Temple of America, chapter 47, verses 15 through 17. The terms Negro, blacks, and African Americans, according to the policies of the United States, define racial groups that are not connected to any of the original peoples of the world. So, and because you're not connected to any original peoples of the world, it means you have no rights, because rights come from pretty much your nationality, your nativity. Okay, now this is actually, where's, you know what? Let me scroll. Hold on. So let's get back to where we was here. The term Negro blacks, all right. The term Negro blacks and African Americans, according to the policies of the United States, define racial groups that are not connected to any of the original peoples of the world. Now, I'm going to show you that, right? And this is significant because you have to be connected to original peoples, because then you're connected to original land, and this is where your political rights come from. So I want to pull up. I'm not going to, this is also in here, so that attachment's in here, but this is the form that I'm referencing. And this is also an attachment in this notice that I'm sending. It's also attachment, which is further evidencing and supporting the cause for correcting the records of nationality and identity. So this right here is called SF 181, and it'd probably be interesting to Google it now to see what it is like, what it looks like. This particular version of the form is from 2005. I didn't really bother to kind of look it up to see if anything has changed with it. But what you notice here is that this is ethnicity and race identification, right? U.S. Office of Personnel Management Guide to Personal Data Standards. So you see, where this is coming from. Now, this is what they have here. Racial categories. They're defining what a racial category is, because we know racial category is a term, right? If I said a man or people, or even the trees over there, we know what that is, but racial category has to be really further defined because it's a term. So they give all of these terms, and particularly you see the colorful black and whites that we tend to use often here, in the United States of America, which aren't really used other places the way that we use them. But what you have to pay attention to here is each of these definitions starts with a person. So if you don't know what a person is, research that. But it says a person having origins in any of the original peoples of North and South America. That's an American Indian or Alaskan. And you can go for each of these, and it's going to tell you a person, then it's going to tell you in any of the original peoples, and then it's going to describe the landmass that the original peoples are connected to. However, when you get to the term black or African American, which a lot of people erroneously refer to themselves as, it says a person, which is a legal person, having origins in any of the black racial groups. Racial groups are not peoples. As a matter of fact, racial groups are racial categories up here. So there is no black racial groups of Africa. It's one of those things that if you're not listening precisely, you'll say, oh, black racial groups of Africa. But definitively, this means nothing. This is like a endless statement that what it really does, it defines you to something that sounds good, but is something that is, by operation of law, stripped of any type of political status and maybe afforded the status of citizenship or subject to the ruling power, which was a tradition in Rome where you could particularly give somebody second-class citizenship. We're going to see that. But it's clear to see that all of these so-called racial groups are connected to original peoples of lands around the world except for the so-called black or African American. Now, what's even more surprising is that if you look up what a white is, it's a person having origins in any of the original peoples of Europe, the Middle East, or North Africa. So they're even saying that the so-called white people, which of course we learn is restricted to the Caucasian races, are having origins from original peoples. So they're legitimate. They're original peoples, and black or African Americans are not. So be very careful about someone who's trying to appeal to your emotions and telling you that you're a black person. Make sure they're not using any magic on you or some type of confusion on you to get you further entwined into a situation that you need to be freeing yourself from. This is why Prophet Noble Drew Ali came in the 1900s, early 1900s, setting up a foundation and a repatriation for us, and stated to us specifically, we are not Negroes, blacks, or colored. Only reason why he didn't say African American is because I don't think they started using that term until maybe the 70s or something like that. So this is evidence of the policy. So there is nobody to argue about, oh, that's not what it is. If somebody wants to argue that that's not how it's going down, there's nothing to argue about. We just read it. So I'm going to go ahead and continue to read through this. Where was we at, actually? We're on the history. So the term, so we went through, I'm going to start back here and read through again. The nationality of the Moors was taken away from them in 1774, and the word Negro, black, and colored was given to the Moors by European nations. And you have to think at this time, I'm just kind of interjecting, the Moors who had ruled Europe for long periods of time had fell in Europe. So this was trickling out around the world into the Americas, and this is probably really around the time when the slavery really started, when the Moors fell in Europe and were enslaved in the colonies in the Americas. A lot of different things and overlaps in history has been going on at this time, but a lot of this has specifically been held from the so-called blacks and African Americans because their estate is free estate. Because if they don't know who they are, they don't know what they're entitled to. They don't know where they fit into this whole thing. So the nationality of the Moors was taken away from them in 1774. Taking away the nationality is disconnecting somebody from their birthrights, from their whole political connections into the entire affairs of the world, their wealth, their history, their legacy, their culture, everything. Right? So it was taken from them in 1774, and the word Negro, black, and colored was given to Moors by European nations. This occurred because they, Moors, us, honored not the principles of their mother and father and strayed after the gods of Europe, of whom they knew nothing. And this is in the Holy Quran of the Moorish Science Temple of America, chapter 47, verses 15 through 17. A lot of people hit me up, say, hey, as a Moorish American, thank you for dropping information. But hey, this is the information you can get. You can go on eBay or Amazon and you can get your hands on the Holy Quran of the Moorish Science Temple of America and begin to educate yourself. And understand, in some regards, there's allegories in there just like the Bible that you need further keys to understand what it's saying. So don't try to, simplify it to, oh, this is erroneous because these stories don't make immediate sense to me. But anyway, not to get off the subject. The term Negro, blacks, and African Americans, according to the policies of the United States, defines racial groups that are not connected to any of the original peoples of the world, it defines blacks or African Americans as racial groups that are not connected to any of the original peoples of the world. And then I point to attachment C, which is SF 181. We just looked at that. Ethnicity and race, SF 181, ethnicity and race identification. Notice, in contradiction in the policy, it defines the white race as descending from the original peoples of Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. It is also affirmed in the ruling of the United States Supreme Court that the Negro has been legally emancipated, and the Supreme Court concluded this in Dred Scott versus Sanford. The Negro is not a citizen, nor was he ever intended to be a citizen under the United States Constitution. So we got the Supreme Court saying that, and we even have the policies on the forms demonstrating that the black or so-called African American is without political status by way of not being connected to any original people, any original landmass, therefore meaning he's stateless and without rights except for any rights that may be conferred upon him through naturalization. But in Rome, as well as in the United States, naturalization conferred upon an alien that does not have a nationality only gives him partial citizenship. But we are part and parcel, by the way of our higher standing, in law, which is why we deal with treaties and international relationships and constitutions, customs, duties, and those type of things. So let's continue on. The term citizen has come to us from its usage in the Roman government to designate a person who had freedom of the city and the right to exercise all political and civil privileges of the government. There was also at Rome a partial citizenship, including civil but not political rights. Aha. See, civil rights, to be, because mostly you get charged with civil and criminal crimes or whatever, quasi crimes, and these things fall under civil. You have a civil status, a legal quote unquote person. So, but that civil status is dead in the eyes of the law because he has no political rights, because he's not connected to any people, connected to any treaty, any nation, any flag, etc. And this is what the loss of nationality. Imagine having a flag, a nationality, a political status in the world, being enslaved, coming out of slavery, not understanding that you were a whole people that had a different system, so you fall into, let's say, a Christian-based system because that's what is ruling, and all your books and everything has been burned and destroyed. So when my understanding is when you was a Moor, or when you were Moorish or a Muslim, that this was just every part of you. It was your lifestyle, everything that you did, how you did, it was from your banking to your religious systems and everything. So it was all about the whole system of life, customs, duties, traditions, and all of this. So now, with your history being hidden from you, being in a stateless position as black, Negro, or colored, then you have the 14th Amendment and different things to confer citizenship on a foreigner or an alien, which is a form of a second-class citizenship, or as we just seen, as it says at Rome, you had civil rights but not political rights. So you could be charged with things, you could be held surety, you could be made into a slave, but there was no resolution for you as far as, even, what do they say, what did they call those things? What they call, everybody want reparations? I know repatriation brings you back into the fold of a thing. I don't know about reparations. We have to look at it. But if it's for, I know maybe it's just for having a wrong being done to you or whatever. But anyway, not to get off the subject, the United States, as you see if you look up and you read that commemorative between Morocco and the U.S., that was a diplomatic relationship between a Muslim and Christian state, or two Muslim and Christian powers. The Muslim and the Christians have been at war for a long time. And I believe it's when the Christian powers or the Europeans, basically, I just kind of say the Europeans and the Christians. Maybe that's not exactly correct, but it's somewhat correct. When you overthrow a people, you impose your culture and your traditions on them, right? So it is my understanding, and there is records, I think I put them in here also, that even show this. And these are government records, that under the Islamic system, the Moorish system, that citizenship, it wasn't really a subject that was dealt with, because everyone was united in Islam, which was the lifestyle altogether. So these are just things to look into. But now let's go ahead and finish this up, because I tried to just kind of give you some oversight, because these are really some things to meditate on. And by the way, I encourage any Moorish American or anyone out there that wants to add to this, send me some emails, send me some things to look at, so we can see where it fits in. So anyway, this partial citizenship occurs by operationally naturalizing a civilly dead person into the citizenship of a foreign government without taking into consideration the person's nativity, nationality, customs, faith, etc. To naturalize means to confer citizenship upon an alien. It is the act of making a foreigner the same in respect to the rights and privileges as if he were a native citizen or subject. The acts of Congress which authorize the naturalization of aliens confine the description of such aliens to free white persons, excluding the African race. And you can see that in the second edition of the Black's Law Dictionary, and you can look up the definition of white people. Our Prophet Noble Drew Ali proclaimed that the 14th Amendment is not necessary for the salvation of our people, and that Moorish Americans are part and parcel to the government of the United States of America. All right, before I go to the next part, I want to go look up this term repatriation, because I know you guys see it on the screen, and I know if you're like me, at first I wasn't really sure if I wanted to use that term, but I did, because Noble Drew Ali was repatriating in the 1920s. And repatriation means the regaining nationality after expatriation. Now, somebody may say we didn't expatriate, but there was an expatriation. You were expatriated, And let's get to the definition. Expatriation is the voluntary act of abandoning one's country and becoming the citizen or subject of another. Now, this so-called voluntary expatriation occurred in part during the birthing of the vessel, because every birth certificate has a name of one of the several states at the top, establishing a domicile or residency for the vessel. And then they use your ID, which establishes a residency in one of the states. And then under the federal laws, they just, I guess you would say, supersede jurisdiction and say if you're a resident of any of the states, you are a uh, a U.S. tax person for one, and you're basically a subject of the United States. So this was a form of expatriation when you take the birth certificates establishing a residency and a domicile for the vessel and then conferring a citizenship on them via the 14th Amendment. That's an expatriation. Um, and maybe somebody will argue and say it isn't. But anyway, that's why I used the words there. But let's go back to where we was. We were here. So now we're at repatriation. Oh, here. Until the truth. I hope y'all can see that. Until the truth of our nationality and divine birthrights was brought to us in 1929. I need to change that to 1913 or 1916. I believe 1913 though. Until the truth of our nationality and divine birthrights was brought to us in 1913 by our illustrious prophet Noble Drew Ali, who began undoing a complex situation by repatriating us through the Moorish Science Temple of America for the present, when every nation must worship under his own vine and fig tree, and every tongue must confess his own. And that's in that part about the vine and fig tree and every tongue confessing their own is in the Moorish in the Holy Quran of the Moorish Science Temple of America, Circle 7, Chapter 47, verse 15. And ye shall hallow the 50th year, and proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all inhabitants thereof. It shall be a jubilee unto you, and ye shall return every man unto his possession, and ye shall return every man unto his family. That's in the King James Bible, Leviticus verse 20, chapter 25, verse 10. Affiance nationality is Moorish American, and demand is hereby made upon officers, agencies, and fiduciaries of the United States government to correct the records and attributes relating to my person, estate, trust, removing references to black, Negro, or African American, followed by affidavit of domicile. I am the living executor for the estate of John Alex Doe, who was born on, the date, and I have the social. Give this notice and statement of standing in all tax-related matters. My domicile and place of general abode is Northwest Mexham, outside the territorial and terrestrial jurisdiction of the United States, who domiciles in North America, not exceeding 10 square miles from its seat of government. Acknowledging the jurisdictional authority in Morocco has been relinquished by the Act of August 1st, 1956, or that's supposed to be by executive order, actually. And remember, when we talk about the relinquishing of jurisdiction in Morocco by the United States, when we say Morocco, you can't untie the country, Morocco, that may operate as a conservatorship, because it's still tied to the Treaty of Marrakesh and the founding of the United States. So when the United States relinquishes jurisdiction in Morocco, that means all of the territories, and these are not geographically based, these are political territories, according to my understanding. So the executive office of the United States has relinquished its jurisdiction, its territorial hold in Morocco. And remember, we are descendants of Moors, are descendants of Moroccans born in America, and the nationality transfers by blood. Okay, by a child of a Moroccan father is a Moroccan national. That's the law in Morocco, and it was the law apparently in the Moorish Empire, because these are the I believe those are part of the divine laws or something like that. I forget what they call them. I know I'm not saying it correctly. But all of these things are things that we Moorish Americans need to further research. Affiant reserves all rights to remain domiciled in ancestral lands and doesn't forfeit any rights, privileges, or benefits secured by the treaty, covenants, and agreements with the Kingdom of Morocco, whereas we are descendants of Moroccans born in America. And the law considers us ipso juris Moorish subjects. And then I put a reference in here, and I believe this reference, you can look it up. This reference is a letter from the International Secretary of State of the Protector, France, but this is some type of international delegation. It's a record it's an international record. And he's defining how, I believe, the subject of citizenship is addressed in Morocco, which under the Islamic system, the Moors, or all the people in Morocco, were united in Islam. So it didn't treat on the subject of citizenship, if you will. And this gives us some insight into our true history. Remember, the true history has been destroyed here. And this is something that, when I really put it into perspective, it's kind of amazing, right? It's a hard pill to swallow. I came up as a Christian, but it is really a hard pill to swallow to understand that we are operating under a system that we really don't know nothing about. It's not the system of our fathers and mothers, if you will. So even we're in a system of that deals with citizenship, when originally we just deal with being part of the family, right? We just dealt with just nationality. That's it. Citizenship is what they do in Rome. So this, now I have an affidavit of nationality and identity. So I just hit him with the affidavit of domicile, establishing my domicile in place of general abode, remaining inhabiting ancestral lands. Now, affidavit of nationality and identity. Affiant exercises the right and fundamental freedom to not accept the benefits or privileges of the 14th Amendment or any identity conferred by naturalization acts of the United States that forfeit benefits entitled to Moorish American descendants of Moroccans born in America. I rescind and repudiate any presumption of naturalization under the laws of the United States if said naturalization deems any loss or forfeiture of Moorish American or Moroccan nationality. I am asserting my right to a nationality, whereas no one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his nationality. That's Article 15 of the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Subsection 1, everyone has a right to nationality. Subsection 2, no one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his nationality, nor the right to change his nationality. So then I go into my reservation of rights. Now notice I'm just showing asserting my rights, giving a positive acknowledgement, demonstrating where positive law that evidence my rights are also written in positive law, even though these are birthrights, human rights. So now I'm going into a reservation of rights. So what I'm trying to demonstrate to you is I'm not being combative. I'm not threatening the recipients of these notices and these memorandums. I'm just stating the facts, and I'm pointing to specific laws because it's very important that I cite and point the specific laws, treaties, covenants, and the things that I rely upon so that they are a part of the permanent record for the estate, and they can be relied upon in any future causes, any future controversies or whatever. So these is important what I'm doing. There's a little science behind it, a little jurisprudence, a little Moorish science behind it. So my reservation of rights. Affiant exercises the fundamental human right to self-determination. This right includes, but is not limited to, affiant's right to identify himself as a Moorish American and to be recognized as such. Affiant's right to practice and unite in Islam. Affiant's right to declare his independence from all adhesion contracts and terms deluding to slavery, suretyship, or colonial authority. Affiant's right to remain domiciled in Northwest Amexem, and ancestral lands. Affiant's right to leave any country, including his own, and to return to his country, which is Article 13, Paragraph 2 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Affiant's right to maintain his national, family, and political allegiance to the Moorish Empire, or to the present Moorish Empire, or however I want to word that. It has to be kind of put a little bit different. Through the Moorish divine and national movement of the world. Affiant's right to not be compelled to pledge political allegiance to the United States government. Affiant's right to command that the United States fulfill its treaty-based obligations under the Treaty of Marrakesh, whereas according to the UN declarations of the rights and the duties of states, Article 14 states every state has a duty to conduct its relations with other states in accordance with international law and with the principle that the sovereignty of each state is subject to the supremacy of international law. Affiant's right to refuse for cause any contract of residency by the United States, whether express or implied, including but not limited to naturalization or the 14th Amendment, where in so doing would forfeit my status or political allegiance. The United Nations Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples, specifically at Article 5, provides that immediate steps shall be taken in trust and non-self-governing territories and all territories that have not yet attained independence to transfer to those designated as colonial peoples. To transfer all power to those designated as colonial people. And now I have a proposed policy, because let's take it back to the top so we can put it back in the perspective of what we were looking at. This is the continuation on the Memorandum of Understanding that's part of the estate, and I give notice to certain critical offices, and this is the support for the notice, which goes through the history, the repatriation by the Prophet Noble Drew Ali. We had an affidavit of nationality. We did an affidavit of domicile. I don't see that on here. Reservation of certain rights, and now this proposed policy, and then we're going to go into corrections to render and memorandum of law. So the proposed policy is basically the founder of the Moorish Science Temple of America, Prophet Noble Drew Ali, began repatriating Moorish Americans to our national descent by proclaiming to the people of the Moorish race by proclaiming to the people of the Moorish race or alleged black race that they were not Negroes, colored folks, black folks, or Ethiopians. It was Prophet Noble Drew Ali who proclaimed there is but one issue for them to be recognized by the government and of the earth, and it comes only through the connection of the Moorish divine and national movement, which is incorporated in this government and recognized by all other nations of the world. So he's also, it's key to say, and this is the divine warning by the prophet. Now, by the way, this is a reference. I'm not going to scroll to it, but it's at the end of this document. You can download this. And I'm sending that with all my notices because the prophet gave this warning in 1920s. And everything else he said is coming to pass. And this divine warning is even more so important now because, for those who believe this sort of thing, when the body, when the man passes form, he still has the spirit and the soul, and he has other frequencies and planes to operate on without the restrictions of the body. So on the ethers, more things can be done. On the ethers, different things can be done. You understand? So the warning is more important then. But the basis of the warning was we can't keep enslaving these people with these colorable terms. That was the warning to the nations of the earth, and it was a warning to us that we cannot continue to refer to ourselves as colored folks, black people, and African Americans, right? So that warning is in there, but this is the proposed solution, the proposed policy All questions of Moorish American nationality may be referred to Noble Drew Ali, the founder of the Moorish Science Temple of America, a religious body politic, and the school for teaching Moors the truth about their birthrights and uplifting humanity. And it can be done so by way of the trust that's managed by the Grand Sheiks, essentially. So we direct all questions of nationality on that type of level to the Grand Sheiks. Those are the political power holders who these things need to be deferred to. Ultimately, how you say it in Spanish? I don't know. All right. So corrections to render, and remember, if you remember from the very first video of this section, this needs to be in the first document. Nationality corrected to Moorish American, race connected to Moorish, religion connected to Islamism, and citizenship corrected to American. Now again, this is just what I'm doing. This is nothing that anyone is required to do. I think it's a powerful thing. I think we should do it. It serves a purpose. But it's not my intention to be the leader of what everybody should be doing. But hey, if it's good for you, then hey, do it. And now I include a memorandum of law. Some of these laws I probably didn't directly discuss, but I may rely on these at a later time if somebody wants to challenge anything that was stated in here. So, memorandum of law. The Moroccan Treaty of Friendship, the Treaty of Marrakech, 1786, or what we say, the Treaty of Peace and Friendship, establishes amicable relations between the parties. So there's our civil and political status, right? Tax Convention, signed between Morocco and the United States, protects against double taxation. And there's another key thing that we have to look at in there, which deals with Article 22. And this deals with maybe how one of the ways, well, we'll talk about that in a different video, so I'm not going to spend too much time talking about that. But I would encourage Moorish Americans to read the tax treaty. On the surface, let's say it protects against double taxation. So if you're paying taxes under your vine and fig tree, and you're a Moorish American, essentially, by operation of customary treaty-based international law and everything I see, you're not a U.S. tax person. But it doesn't say that you're not supposed to pay your tax. And I believe under our system, we probably, I don't know if it was tax or not, but we had zakat, which is a form of charity, but these were obligatory charities and just systems under the Islamic system of doing things. Just different ways of banking, different ways of, estate planning, different ways of commerce. All things was just different systems. I feel like I'm rambling. So I also bring up the Constitution of the United States, which shall be under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land, and all judges of every state shall be bound thereby. That's in the Constitution, Article 6, Clause 1. And then we bring in we talked about the treaty. We already brought up the treaty. And also, Article 3 and 6, or Article 6, Section 3, where it talks about, it's already right here, Article 6, Clause 1, establishes that all treaties, or which shall be made and under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land. So that's how we're showing that this treaty is the supreme law, basically. We, once again, recognize that jurisdiction has been relinquished in Morocco by executive order of the United States, and we recognize the international human rights instruments, the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People, more importantly, the Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples, wherein it says, all armed or repressive measures of all kinds directed against dependent peoples shall cease in order to enable them to exercise peacefully and freely their right to complete independence, and the integrity of their national territory shall be respected, and immediate steps shall be taken in trust and non-self-governing territories, or all other territories which have not yet attained independence, to transfer all powers to the peoples of these territories without conditions or reservations, in accordance with their freely expressed freely expressed will and desire without any distinction as to race, creed, or color, in order to enable them to enjoy complete independence and freedom. That's the Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and People, a human rights instrument that falls under the Executive Order 13107, immediate implementation of human rights instruments. The rest of this, oh yeah, is very important. You can sign or you can autograph, thumbprint this, put your seals, whatever on it with the notice. It's important that you get a standalone jurat because you did an affidavit of domicile, a reservation of rights. So you got to make sure that you put attach the notary statement for the affidavit. Breaking news, everybody. Breaking news. Now, I was in the middle of doing this video and somebody sent me some breaking news that's relevant to what we're discussing. So I'm going to just bring it up here and then we're going to finish this out. So the breaking news is this, right? This was published May 20th, 2019. The Supreme Court, this is from Fox News. Gorsuch breaks with conservative justices, delivering win to Native American hunter. And basically the significance of this is that the case of Herrera versus Wyoming deals with the treaty from 1868, which allowed members of a tribe to hunt unoccupied lands in the U.S. in exchange for their land, which went on to become part of the Wyoming and Montana, which went on to become part of Wyoming and Montana. At issue was whether hunting rights in the treaty are still in effect or were nullified when Wyoming became a state. In 1890, because see, the treaty pre-existed the state, right? So basically the Supreme Court said that the treaty is valid even though the treaty pre-existed the state. So the Supreme Court is standing in alignment with the law that the treaties are the supreme law of the land, which is also expressed in the Constitution, and it's something that I just said. I'm so tired of this, man. Sorry. This is, Lord have mercy. Don't just be emailing me all this stuff. I got stuff I'm doing. I'm sorry, people. You know, and that's my phone. So imagine if everybody was just texting me every time it just wouldn't stop going. So I'm gonna cut my phone back off so we can finish this up. Let me do that right now. So that's really all I wanted to say. That was recently the Supreme Court, which is you got the legislative, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. So now for everybody trying to use their treaty benefits, right? You already have the highest appeal in the land, which is the Supreme Court has already ruled that your ancient treaties are still valid. So if a treaty is valid before the formation of the state, then the Treaty of Marrakesh would absolutely be valid before the formation of the United States. So I believe that the so-called black people, so-called African Americans, are ipso juris Moorish subjects or Moroccans. So anyway, let me get back to the last part of this, because the last part is also a good part. Where was we at? We were here. So we just finished reading that excellent piece about the Declaration of Independence of Colonial Countries and Indigenous Peoples, or whatever the whole long title is. And now this is one of the attachments. We're looking at a letter from George Washington to Muhammad ibn Abdullah, the Sultan of Morocco. This is in 1789. You know, the Constitution is from what, 1787? And the authority for the United States to do business in the dominions of North America was granted in what, 1786, around the time of the Treaty of Peace and Friendship. Let's look at some of the points in this letter. So first, let's look. He says, since the date of the letter, which the late Congress by their president addressed to your Imperial Majesty. So he's saying, since the last time we spoke, the United States of America have thought proper to change their government and institute a new one agreeable with the Constitution, of which I have the honor herewith to enclose a copy. Oh, by the way, I forgot to do this. Who is George Washington giving a copy of this Constitution to? This is Sultan Muhammad ibn Abdullah. This is the picture that they still have in Morocco today. This is him. So you might Google his name and find, you will, if you Google his name right now, and you should do this. You really should do this, just so you can know that we're not making this up. They are changing the history, and they're trying to change the face of people and everything. Google, and you'll see a lot of drawings and depictions of him being an Arab, and not an original Arab. I mean not an Arab with these type of features. All right, so I mean, and maybe not an Arab, but what's the proper term for those people? I don't know what you call them. But they're, whatever they are, Khazarians. I'm not sure what they are, but those people. And listen, it just is what it is. Why are we changing the features of people? But this is the Sultan of Morocco that George Washington was writing this letter to. He says, the United States having unanimously appointed me to the supreme executive authority in this nation, your Majesty's letter of August 17, 1788, which by reason of the dissolution of the late government remained unanswered and has been delivered to me. I have also received the letters which your Imperial Majesty has been so kind to write in favor of the United States. To the Bashals of Tunis and Tripoli, I present to you a sincere acknowledgement and thanks of the United States for this important mark of your friendship for them. Now here he says, we greatly regret the hostile disposition of those regencies toward this nation who have never injured them. It is not to be removed on terms of our power to comply with. It is not to be removed on our terms of power to comply with. Within our territories, there are no mines with or gold or silver. So they don't have no territory in the mines of the United States. And this young nation is just recovering from the waste and dissolution of a long war, and have not as yet had time to acquire riches by agriculture and commerce, but our soil is bountiful and our people is industrious, and we have reason to flatter ourselves that we shall gradually become useful to our friends. The encouragement which your Majesty has been pleased generously to give to our commerce with your dominions, the punctuality with which you have caused the treaty with us to be observed, and the just and generous measures taken in the case of Captain Proctor, make a deep impression on the United States and confirm their respect for the attachment to your Imperial Majesty. He's basically expressing that they are that they have obligated themselves based off of, because this was diplomacy, what he's expressing. There's been agreements, ongoing agreements before this. It gives me great pleasure to have the opportunity of assuring, this is assurance, this is commercial, this is commerce, your Majesty, that while I remain at the head of the United States, I shall not cease to promote every measure that may conduce to the friendship and harmony which so happily subsist between your empire and them, and shall esteem myself happy in every occasion of convincing your Majesty at the high sense which in common with the whole nation I entertain the magnanimity, wisdom, and benevolence of your majesty. May the Almighty bless you, bless your imperial majesty, our great magnanimous friend, with his constant guidance and protection. So he's giving him thanks for guidance and protection. Now, when you say guidance and protection, this is George Washington right here. What I pose to you is, who is the brother back here with the turban on his head? And what is he doing? He's looking directly at George Washington. Is that guidance and protection? I don't know. But it's, now, that's a brother. Now, they say he's a slave. This is supposedly Billy Lee Williams, who they say is a slave. But he's a person who's always been around with George Washington. They claim he was George Washington's manservant. I seen even articles where they said Billy Lee taught George Washington how to wrap a cloth around his head. Imagine that. Well, this brother's wearing a turban. Now, I'm going to show you another picture of Billy Lee Williams. And by the way, at this time, the time of that picture, the writings back and forth was George Washington's writing to the Sultan of Morocco. And he's thanking him for allowing them to do commerce in his dominions. If it's not, I didn't see it in this letter, but it's another letter. It's in there. So, yeah, it's in another letter. And it's probably on the next page. But here's the other page, the other letter. And I will encourage you to look up Billy Lee George Washington painting, Mount Vernon. Go to the website, download this huge picture right here. This is a big picture. Notice this Billy Lee, who's a so-called slave, because this is a real painting, because it's still in the in George Washington's house. I guess that's a museum now. I can't get the whole thing on here. Let's see. There's the picture. Notice Billy Lee Williams has a turban on his head, the same turban as the flag that flew here, the Moorish flag, the Moroccan flag. He has a jewel in the center. He's got the red collar on. Now, also, once again, Billy Lee Williams, if you look him up, and all these other pictures, they're going to depict him as either Spanish looking. They're going to depict him, they're going to lighten him up more and more. But the actual picture that's in the museum on the estate where Billy Lee Williams lived, they got a picture of George Washington standing on the ground in a Masonic pose, but he is on the ground still. And the so-called slave Billy Williams is on the horse. But remember, George Washington is writing letters to the Sultan thanking him for guidance. He's on the horse while the European is on the ground, and his eyes is directly on him. On this picture and in this picture, we can't see that much. But he's watching George Washington. He's watching him. I just find that just so interesting. Maybe somebody understands more of what that's really about. But I like this right here. I like this picture right here. And this is a big picture, so I say go download it. Right? George Washington has his covering removed. You know what I'm saying? It reminds me of the story when you hear about, walking across the desert, per se. But I'm just saying, these are just an observation. And again, during this time, this is your Sultan, the emperor or the ruler of Morocco, including Al-Maghrib Al-Aqsa, present day North America, what we call America. So this is where the Treaty of Marrakesh stems from, and as we just looked at, the Supreme Court has ruled today that these treaties are still valid. So there's a lot of things that come with that. This is other letters that show the diplomatic relations. Is there anything else here to show? I don't really know. See, here it is. The encouragement, here it is. The encouragement which your majesty has been pleased generously to give to our commerce with your dominions. The punctual, so I did say it over there earlier. So they doing commerce in these dominions. We went over this, right? Yeah, we went over that. The ethnicity and race form. Now, this was here. I'm not going to go into this right now, but just to say it for the Moorish Americans, the scholars among us, this is pretty much, this is the per capita tax card that was around during the time of the Prophet, from my understanding. So his demonstration, even by paying your per capita tax, and now today we have a treaty or a convention that stems from the treaty that protects against double taxation. So it would mean if you were under your own vine and fig tree paying your per capita tax monthly to the Moorish Science Temple of America, you will be, by operation of law, exempt from any type of United States taxes. And I'm not saying that, you're not just because of other reasons, but it's just something to look at. Moorish Science Temple of America is a school. Moorish Science Temple of America is a body politic. It's through the Moorish Science Temple of America that Moorish Americans become part and parcel, as the Prophet had stated in the divine constitution and bylaws. The treaty between said governments protects against double taxation. More research should be done on the subject. And at the end of this, I put my judicial notice and proclamation of nationality. Notice I have my peace and friendship number 22 stamp signed through and all of that. I get these stamps off of eBay. And yeah, let's just do it like that. I want to put one more picture up here. We can look one more time at George Washington and Billy Lee Williams, the so-called slave that George Washington purchased. Now, by the way, Billy Lee Williams was said to be of a celebrity, if you will. People were coming to meet him. He did a lot of organization and planning for George Washington. Now, another side of the script, somebody suggested that, for example, George Washington's in this Masonic pose. I wish I knew what the pose meant. I don't know. But remember, the Moors ruled in Europe at a time when the Europeans were never even over here in the Americas, or definitely not in the Americas in any form of power. They might have been in the Americas as slaves within the colonies, within the 13 colonies, which I believe the 13 colonies were already under Moorish rule when the Moors ruled Europe, and even Florida, was even Florida was under Spanish rule, and the Moors ruled Spain at a time. So at these times when the Moors ruled Europe and Spain, the Europeans, or the Caucasians as we would call them, we wouldn't even call them Europeans really, because they were not probably even completely in the country of Europe. I'm guessing they migrated from the Caucasus Mountains down into Europe, but they didn't have access to the seas or the equatorial currents so that they can really come over here to the Americas in force as, who was it? Abu Bakari, you can look him up. In the 1300s, the Mali Empire, the king that sold to the Americas in deep numbers. Deep numbers. So only later on, when this political stuff started going on, I would imagine the Europeans were starting to get over here in major numbers. But a part of the story is that maybe George Washington was a part of the royal family or something, which means they were royal family because they had Moorish blood, the people who civilized them. So maybe this could be some of the reason why George Washington had even a stature, and why you see the so-called slave. Like, I really don't know. I would like to know what's going on, but I imagine that, they talked about the story of George Washington chopping down the cherry tree. If you've heard that before, that's like chopping down the Moorish flag here, pretty much hiding the legacy or whatever. Well, if you look, just kind of looking at some of the pictures, you have all these European statesmen who were getting rich and wealthy off of slavery, and violence and killing and things is nothing new to them. It's nothing new to a lot of people at that time, but to them it was definitely nothing new to them, coming from where they've came from. So to hear that the Moors have lost all strongholds in Europe and Spain, and that now they are outcast and banished or whatever, how can George Washington, I'm not making an argument for him because hell, I don't know, but how can George Washington hoard off the inevitable? I really don't know. I don't know. Or he could have just been a straight up double crosser, saying one thing to the Sultan, knowing full well Because see, remember, he wanted to maintain that diplomatic relationship because in Gibraltar, the Moors had the ability to cripple the United States as far as commerce, as far as stopping the international trade. But that's neither here nor there. Just know that nations and the present day of affairs are based off of covenants, treaties, and everything is law. So things may seem chaotic and all of these things, but everything is operating in accordance with the law. Islam. Hope you enjoyed this.